Good morning. Happy Wednesday, everybody. I'm out here at my outdoor office with a second cup of coffee. And just a splendid morning. Over the last several weeks, if you remember, I've been reflecting on the different types of literature that we find in the Bible. So we have Gospels in the New Testament and letters like Paul's letters to Romans or the Corinthians or Thessalonians. Then we've got Apocalypse, which is primarily the book of Revelation. And in the Old Testament, there's the law, first 5 books, Genesis through Deuteronomy. And then there's the prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, Amos, Malachi, Habakkuk, all of those books. And then last week I referred to the histories, the history that we find. You could sort of count Acts as history, but that's iffy. But definitely in the Old Testament, it's Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings. And so today we'll get to, I guess, probably the last major section, major type of literature that we find when we open the pages of Scripture. And this would be the wisdom literature. The wisdom literature. For us as Christians generally have looked at 5 books as being wisdom literature: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, Psalms, and Song of Solomon. But even within that, the truly classic wisdom literature is Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. So we're primarily looking at those 3 books: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. In the way that our Jewish kin divide out Scripture, organize their Bible, our Old Testament, they don't have a separate, neat category for wisdom literature. They recognize it like we do, but they don't have a separate category. They've just got law, prophets, and writings, and the books that really are counted as wisdom literature are included in that broad category called the writings. So this wisdom literature, what is wisdom? To begin with the biblical definition says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That to begin to get wise, you fear God. To begin to learn wisdom, you fear God, and from there, that's where it begins. Biblically, wisdom is a gift from God. Wisdom is a gift from God. It's something that God gives us. It's a gift, and wisdom is different from knowledge. And wisdom is, you could look at it this way: wisdom is how you use the knowledge that you have. Wisdom is how you use the abilities that you have. It's being able to discern right from wrong. So that is wisdom, and it's a different thing than knowledge or skill or ability. When you read in Proverbs 8, we find that wisdom, it almost seems to be personified. Wisdom seems to be personified in Proverbs 8. So when we look at these books of wisdom in the Old Testament, 2 of them are really closely associated with Solomon. That'd be the Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. Excuse me a second. The dumb cat. So these two books, Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, are associated with wisdom, with Solomon. And Solomon is many of the Proverbs are ascribed to Solomon. Traditionally, the book of Ecclesiastes is ascribed to Solomon. Here's what we read something about the description of Solomon. This comes from 1 Kings 4. For he is wiser than all other men, wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame was in all the surrounding nations. He also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He spoke also of beasts and of birds and of reptiles and of fish. And all people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. Solomon he's famed for having, when he ascended to the throne, he's famed for having asked God for wisdom. He didn't ask God for wealth or fame or long life. He simply asked for wisdom. And God responded by saying, okay, because you didn't ask for wealth or fame and ask for wisdom, I'll give you wisdom, and I'll give you the others as well because you didn't ask for them. And that's reported both in Kings and in Chronicles. And so these wisdom books, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. Ecclesiastes is traditionally ascribed to Solomon. Many of the Proverbs are ascribed to Solomon. And Job is one of the most ancient books of the Old Testament, and the author of that is, of course, long lost to history. Within these, there are really two different strands. We have the Proverbs, and then you have Ecclesiastes and Job. And what we find in these two strands is really quite different. I'm going to read just a little bit from Proverbs. I'm just going to start reading a little bit from the beginning of Proverbs 19. Better is a poor person who walks in his integrity than one who is crooked in speech and is a fool. Desire without knowledge is not good, and whoever makes haste with his feet misses his way. When a man's folly brings his way to ruin, his heart rages against the Lord. Wealth brings many new friends, but a poor man is deserted by his friends. A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who breathes out lies will not escape. Many seek the favor of a generous man, and everyone is a friend to man who gives gifts. So that's sort of a flavor for Proverbs. They're short, tend to be very short sayings, aphorisms, if you will, that are just the conventional wisdom from many of us, probably Solomon, but from the culture. The Proverbs are very practical. They're practical. They're somewhat optimistic. somewhat conservative, if you will, not in the political sense at all. But here's the general rule of thumb: train up a child in the way he should go, and he won't soon depart. There's a general rule of thumb. It's not a guaranteed promise, but as a rule of thumb, train a child in the right way, and he or she will grow up the right way. So that's Proverbs. It's practical and somewhat optimistic. And then we have Ecclesiastes and Job. Ecclesiastes too is traditionally ascribed to Solomon, and Ecclesiastes is a very different book than Proverbs. Ecclesiastes is written from the point of view of an old man who has lived and loved and experienced, and looking across many years and many days, he recognizes that most all of what he has seen and done amounts to nothing. And he looks back all of his years and all of his days and recognizes that most all of it is vanity. As Ecclesiastes says, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Ecclesiastes and also Job are a little darker. And they're a little darker than Proverbs. With Ecclesiastes, on and on and on, the preacher, as he's called, searches for meaning that there isn't. There just isn't any meaning found anywhere until right near the end of the book, and I won't spoil it for you. And then Job is very different reading than is Ecclesiastes, but Job as well is dark. Because Job undercuts the conventional notion, the tidy notion that good living, righteousness, leads to health and wealth and prosperity. Job just cuts the feet right out from underneath that, and it leaves us wrestling with this question: why is it that the righteous would suffer? It deals with that, hits it head on, and it never gives us a straight answer. So we have these three books: Proverbs, which are general wisdom, conventional wisdom, if you will, the sayings of Solomon or others like him. They are conventional wisdom, they're aphorisms. As a general, if this, then that. Sayings for how to live a good life. And then there's Job and there's Ecclesiastes, which are quite different. They're darker. They're not pithy, short sayings of wisdom, but rather they're more extended dialogue, monologue, if you will, about why, how. In the case of Ecclesiastes, where's meaning? In the case of Job, why this terrible suffering? I commend these three books to your attention, particularly Ecclesiastes and Job. It's Proverbs, you read a few Proverbs, but it's tough sledding to read a whole lot of them. Those are just one right after the other, but just take some time and read Ecclesiastes and read Job. It's dark, but it's really, really good. So anyway, with that, hope your Wednesday is really, really good.